This last week, I wrote perhaps the most important blog post, at least in a long time. It was about the Wells Fargo Community Bank related activity, the sales frauds there, and the investigation and then the subsequent report by an administrative law judge for the US banking regulator, the OCC, Office of the Control of the Currency. And he accused and charged, basically, recommended charges against both the Chief Risk Officer and the Chief Internal Audit Executive, the CAE. And there were some number of charges. The most significant one was that they did not perform a root cause analysis to understand why these sales frauds happened. And if they had, allegedly, that might have identified there being a management problem with the setting of unrealistic objectives, quotas basically, and their management pressure to achieve them, such that thousands of employees, 5,300 at least identified, committed sales frauds where they moved customers' money, bought financial instruments without permission of the customer, and so on. So that's one. But the other allegation, which is really interesting, is that both of them failed to identify and report, communicate to the board or the banking regulators themselves defects in the effectiveness of risk management. Now, I can understand asking internal audit and expecting internal audit to assess risk management effectiveness, but it's somewhat unusual in my experience to ask a chief risk officer to self-report issues in their own program and activities, the systems and processes that they are responsible for, to identify those defects and report those to the board and to the regulators. So, having said that, I think it's important to start thinking about, well, how do you go about assessing the effectiveness of risk management? And I, for some period of time, have said it is not assessing compliance with firm policies. That does not necessarily mean it's effective. It's not about compliance or conformance to the COSO ARM framework, if that has been adopted by the firm, or with the ISO 31000 Global Risk Management Standard, if that has been adopted, or even some hybrid version of that which has been adopted and made into a policy. It's not about compliance with risk appetite and other policy statements. What it should be is about whether risk management practices, processes, systems, organization meet the needs of the organization. Now, what are those needs? The needs include helping ensure that people are making important decisions, whether that is setting strategies or executing against them, whether it's tactical or strategic decision making. It's also about deciding whether current levels of risk and opportunity are acceptable and desirable. It's about enabling these decisions to be made effectively so that the company can achieve its objectives. Because after all, we are still talking about risk to objectives. And to me, effective risk management is acknowledged by decision makers, by leaders in the organization, and by members of the board as helping them make informed and intelligent decisions that will lead to achieving the objectives, so the success of the organization. It's not only about avoiding failure. It's not about managing a list of risks, those risks being things that can harm us. That doesn't take you very far, because if all you're doing is avoiding failure, you're not going to succeed. You have to take risk for success. So effective risk management, to me, meets the needs of the organization, especially in ensuring that those people running the company and making decisions have the information they need. Now, one of the concepts that I introduced, I haven't heard anybody else talking about this, in my book, Worldclass Risk Management, talks about how reliable, how current, how timely, how complete is the information being used about what might happen, being used in decision making, in strategy setting, in capital allocation, in determining whether we're going to take this risk or not. How reliable is that? Is it complete? Is it current? And in order to do that, we need essentially to do a risk assessment. What could prevent the information flowing up to decision makers, which they're using? What could prevent it being current and timely? Well, current means it's up to date. And frankly, if you're only thinking about risk and the current state of what might happen on a quarterly, maybe even a monthly basis, depending upon the volatility of risk, that may mean, in fact, it's very likely to mean, that when you're making decisions based upon an understanding of risk and that understanding is out of date, you're going to make the wrong decision. So timely speaks to the frequency of update and the thoroughness of update. Complete means that somebody is actually thinking about all the things that might happen. Not only existing risks, which might be changing in terms of their effect and the speed of onset and things like that, but also new risks or risks which are going away. So that can be affected by a lot of different things, including not looking, failing to look, not having somebody assigned to constantly monitor a particular area where there's a source of risk. It could be that the person assigned doesn't have the right tools, doesn't have the right knowledge, doesn't have their experience, doesn't have enough time to be doing that effectively. It could also mean that the right people are not being brought in to the consideration of risk when it comes to a particular decision. So, for example, when at Selectron Corporation, no, at Maxtor Corporation, the Singapore team in charge of procurement was considering who they were going to purchase some critical materials from. And they had options. They could buy from one vendor or a combination of vendors. And they could allocate different amounts to this combination of vendors. So they brought in the manufacturing people, obviously, that's important. They brought in the salespeople to understand how much that critical material might be needed and when, because it's all driven by sales forecast. They brought in the financial people. They brought in legal. They brought in all the people that were going to be able to provide relevant, useful information to make that decision. And that was perhaps the best risk management exercise I've seen, because they made sure that everybody who could provide useful, critical information for the decision was present, able to speak, and they were able to talk about it. There are other risks to risk management information. I talk about these again in the book. Things like cognitive bias. The feeling that, well, I've done it before, therefore this is what will work again. The reluctance to believe what people are telling you. All kinds of biases come in, and that can prevent us from making the right decision. And that decision, in this case, is the assessment of risk. When we are assessing risk, the likelihood of something happening, the likelihood of a particular effect of something happening, we very often are using judgment. And that judgment can be warped by bias. Another thing that can affect the reliability of risk assessments, for example, is errors in the models that we've used, whether that be sophisticated models developed by some kind of an analyst, machine learning, AI. All of these could be wrong. And we should be thinking about, okay, how reliable are these? How confident are we that these models, this information coming to us is accurate, it's going to be complete, it's going to be timely and current, it's going to be up to date as well. So there are a lot of things that can be a risk or source of risk to the risk assessment process. And I think when you evaluate the effectiveness of risk management, you have to be thinking about risks to that risk assessment process, and then what controls exist to manage those risks. Now, I've just touched on the surface of this. There's far more in that book, World-Class Risk Management. Appreciate your thoughts, which you can add in the comments. If you like this and you'd like to, especially if you'd like to hear more on different parts of this, please leave a comment. And of course, subscribe to the channel. Thank you.